Hello, I want to welcome everybody to the AfroTech Metaverse. My name is Frank Tramble, and I have the pleasure of serving as Howard University's Vice President and Chief Communications Officer. Today, we're going to be discussing HBCU's Guide to Securing Your First Job in Tech, which is an important conversation about so many Black young boys and women who have an opportunity to get into the tech space. HBCUs are building up the next generation of young pioneers and dreamers who are welcoming themselves into these conversations and into these spaces that have traditionally been dominated by people not in the Black community. So we'll discuss how to support and funnel our young creators from HBCUs into their first tech startups and their corporate jobs across the software, development, tech, education, gaming, you name it, we're going to discuss it. I am joined today and honored to have Dr. Isaac Y. Adai on this call with us. It's going to be a great conversation. Dr. Adai is an award-winning educator, a speaker, a strategist. He currently serves as the Chief Strategy Officer for Pivot Technology School, which is a coding academy, and is the managing partner at HBCU Impact Capital, which is an emerging VC fund. Isaac served as an assistant professor of business administration in the College of Business at Tennessee State University, and he conducts research in social entrepreneurship and teaches courses in business strategy, entrepreneurship, and leadership. Dr. Adai, Isaac, how are you doing? Welcome to the chat.
Thank you for having me. So good to be here. Great topic, really important. Can't wait to unpack this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I see you also just wrote a book, Black Boy Fly, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yep, that's my new
Awesome.
book. It released in the fall of last year. And just a quick note about that, you and I are Black men and we've been in different spaces, but we often aren't empowered. And this book is essentially to help empower brothers that look like us and that are younger than us trying to find their way in life.
I love it. I love it. So we'll definitely have to make sure you check that out. So, getting into the conversation, I always like to ask this question to everyone. We get into, how do we get into tech, et cetera, but really, what's your mission? What has been your mission to get into all these wonderful spaces, to, be a part of Pivot Technology? What's your mission in all of this?
Sure. It started out with me trying to find a way to reach my full potential. And what I realized along that journey was that my mission was to empower people that look like me. Mm-hmm. That's simply put, to help people of color from different backgrounds, some diverse backgrounds, to reach their fullest potential and achieve greatness in life. And so from my engineering career to my academic career and now my startup career, everything that I've done has been grounded in trying to help uplift people that look like you and I and help us achieve greatness in our personal and professional lives.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about Pivot Tech and how did this come about, and what's there? How does that tie into your mission?
Yeah, sure. So Pivot Technology School is a Black-led, Black-founded tech workforce development company based in Nashville, Tennessee. It launched in 2020. Two co-founders, good friends of mine, brothers here in Nashville. I joined the team in September 2020, and essentially our goal is to help diversify tech. And we do that by training people from diverse backgrounds that are looking to transition from a prior career into a tech career. We offer 20-week virtual programs, cybersecurity, data analytics, web development, and they essentially leave us prepared to have entry-level roles in the technology industry. We just got tired of companies saying they can't find people of color to work in tech. And so we're solving for that through our work.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because even with my work with Howard, we deal with a lot of different companies, and much of my conversations with companies sometimes start with, they don't know where the talent is, and it's why they reach out to a Howard, it's why they reach out to a Tennessee State, it's why they may reach out to a Pivot Tech. And we look at the stats, and they're just staggering of the underrepresentation that we have in a lot of spaces. So here's a stat for you. I want you to react to this. Less than 5% of employees at major technology companies are Black, even though 9% of all computer science graduates are currently Black. Why do you think that there's
Sheesh.
a discrepancy there? And then Washington
Yeah.
Post, actually recovered that or
Those
reported.
numbers are staggering. And sadly, that is not any different from what we've seen 10 or even 20 years ago. When I started my first engineering role at IBM in Austin, Texas, I was one of the only Black engineers in my division. And so, unfortunately, it's not new. I think part of this is grounded in the way in which the corporate world is structured, specifically technology. When I worked in various tech roles, I was involved sometimes in hiring. It was very hard to get a person of color hired in because oftentimes the decision makers didn't look like people of color, right? And when you think about it, Frank, if you're starting a company, if I'm starting a company, we're likely going to reach out and tap into our most immediate network of people. They are likely looking like us, behaving like us, thinking like us. So somewhat nepotism, but also just some comfort, personal comfort.
Mhm.
Once these numbers hit and folks have seen what's happening, we started to realize the need to change, and there's been more intentionality around it. But for many years, I think folks have just been comfortable with who they work with, and they haven't gone beyond that to be more intentional to bring different people in.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the reason why there's a lack of diversity? When we do have people graduating from other schools outside HBCUs, one of the things that I always find interesting as a part of the conversation is there are the HBCUs that we need, and they serve our Black population, but Black people do go to PWIs.
Right.
And when they get into these spaces, what should they be doing to help make sure that HBCUs are represented and people that look like them are represented as well?
Yeah, sure. This is something that I've experienced, and I have this conversation with a lot of people in my peer group. We have to be advocates for each other, for our institutions, for our communities. I was literally having a conversation last night at dinner with a friend, classmate. She works at an investment bank here in town, and she made sure that they recruited from Tennessee State University. They were having recruitment conversations, and she said, "You're looking for finance students. We have an HBCU that has an accredited business school. You should be recruiting there." So we have to be the ones to advocate. And it's because sometimes it's just not a thought. And if no one is in the room offering that perspective never enters the conversation. So I think that's our duty.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah. So let's take a step back and look at how you got into the tech industry. I know for myself, I'm originally from Detroit, and there wasn't a whole lot of tech, if you will, in the K-12 side. Now, I happen to go to a school that had an engineering academy. And so I grew up actually building robots, competing them in competitions. I had opportunity to work in that space. And although I may not have fully gone into that in my career, I kind of got exposed to it a bit. How did you get exposed to the tech world, when you were starting out? Because I believe you had a career pivot, right?
Yeah, I did. I started out in tech. Now, I'll just give you some context. I'm a first generation American. My parents are from Ghana. And if you know anything about African parents, you have three career choices growing up: doctor, lawyer, engineer. And so up until the 8th grade, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. But I've always had a strong affinity for math and science. And my father, he taught industrial engineering and industrial manufacturing at the universities that he was a professor at. And so I spent a lot of time in his classrooms watching robots, looking at the technology. I think that was my first foray into STEM in a formal sense. But I was also a part of that movement to get more young people of color in STEM in the 90s. I participated in a lot of summer camps, and that really showed me that engineering was a viable career path. So I went to Tennessee State University. I studied computer engineering. I did my master's as well, and I got my career started down that path at IBM. But it's funny you mentioned Detroit. My first internship was at a Ford engine plant in Romeo, Michigan, just north of Detroit. And GM was recruiting me pretty heavy too. So I think I was destined to go down that career path. And again, in the 90s, there was this really big push, a lot of government funding, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, to introduce children of color into STEM. And I was a part of that.
Nice. And I definitely know Romeo well. I started my college career actually in mechanical engineering because I was coming out of.
Wow.
Yeah, so I worked for Lear Corporation and had to work in some plants out in Romeo because we worked up for the Chrysler division. And so I've been down that road. It's It is an interesting life. It's one that I wish I could have kept up with, but definitely understand that. So
Well, let me just say this: as an intern at Tennessee State, just finished my sophomore year. My first internship is an engine plant assignment in Romeo.
yeah.
I asked myself, what am I getting into here? But it opened my eyes. Automotive has definitely changed the game for many of us.
Yeah, and for those who don't appreciate automotive, you don't understand it until you spent 12 plus hours putting seat belts on Dodge Dakotas back to back all single day. Yes, I did that.
Wow.
And that's how
Wow.
I gained my respect for everyone
Yeah.
in the STEM fields as I was interning and working to be in that space too.
You paid your dues for sure.
I definitely did. Yeah. So in that space, one of the things that, helped me a lot was having some really good mentors and some college professors like yourself,
Sure.
that can help get you through the process. During your time at Tennessee State, can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you saw, in helping to get your students, from point A into the tech industry?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that question up. In the 7 years that I spent as an assistant professor in a business school, I worked a lot with the engineering school and getting students prepared to go into corporate, specifically within the tech industry. Two things stand out. One, students feeling as if they were capable. I spent a lot of time talking with my students and empowering them that you are talented and you deserve to be in these environments. It may be intimidating. You may not feel as though you can thrive and succeed, but trust me, I've been at these companies. You're just as good. You're just as qualified. You're just as talented. That was the first hurdle. I really think that was the first hurdle. And I haven't really understood the origins of a lot of that hesitance and apprehension that I felt from my students, but it was something that was truly there. And then I think the other half of it was getting the companies to really invest in Tennessee State University, right? What many companies have done, especially during this era of racial reckoning, they've said, we're going to solve our tech diversity challenge by going to a Black college. But they're not approaching the Black college from an investment perspective. It's like we're trying to cherry pick talent. My thing was, what are you doing to add value to the university? What are you doing to add value to the students? That's going to give you the best opportunity to get the talent in the door, because everybody's on campus now. I know you guys are seeing this in Howard. They're showing up with big checks and they're saying, give us your best talent. And so it's competitive. So, getting the students prepared and then getting the companies to value investing in the HBCU, I think were the two things that stood out the most.
Yeah. And I can't tell you what emotional response I had when you said the capable part. That means so much, because one of the things that, I equate back to my childhood growing up was as a Black boy, what I was capable of was really only a sum of my experiences. Whatever I experienced, I then believed I could. And so if I didn't have that experience, it was really hard to grasp that. It was really hard to kind of reach out and say, this is something that I can do. One of the problems that I think is in a lot of spaces, especially ones that aren't in cities, you don't have an opportunity to learn life. You don't have an opportunity to see things outside of what's on the TV. And so that's where these experiences really do matter. So what do you think it's a good idea for the tech industries to, maybe start earlier than just HBCUs and get into the public school systems too? Because that's really when I made a decision on, what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. That is exactly the right approach. Early exposure for everything, I think, is just valuable. I have 3 young boys. We're having conversations with them now about their interest. These decisions, as you just mentioned, are being made very early in life, and decisions around, am I capable? Do I have the confidence? What am I interested in? So companies are very smart, the ones that are marketing to youth now, but I think they can be more intentional around thinking about this from a career perspective and partnering with the K-12 system. We're seeing the opportunities presented to our HBCU students in terms of internships and things like that, maybe even co-ops here and there, but there's so much value in going into a high school and getting engaged with students at that level. You were at a math and science magnet, you probably benefited from this in some capacity, but students that aren't at those types of schools don't get that exposure, but there's a lot of opportunity to tap into that market.
Yeah. I know at Howard, we have a couple programs in the connecting with the schools, but that's something that we're always trying to build out too. Howard has
Yeah.
a middle school on campus specifically for STEM. We have a STEM middle school that's right in the middle of our campus, which is an awesome opportunity for the young people not only to see and learn in that space, but also to be on a historically Black college or university, campus, and see what that looks like at the collegiate level as a kind of having that visualization right there, I think is important.
Yeah. To your point, Frank, and I haven't ever really talked about this, but part of my tenure at Tennessee State University involved K-12 engagement. We're really not high school engagement, some middle school, but I was a chair of the College of Business's Student Recruitment and Retention Committee, and we would partner with local high schools, and annually we would bring students on campus and expose them to what it meant to be a business student. But I would also tap alumni to come in and speak. So they're hearing from faculty about what it means to be a business student. They're hearing from existing business students. Then they're hearing from alum that graduated from the business school who are out here doing incredible things in the world. And that's going to give them a better insight on, is this the career path that I want? Because, I mean, let's just be honest. When you watch TV, right, we all know what doctors do. We all know what lawyers do. What do computer scientists do? What do computer engineers do? Movies don't really give you that context. So when you're on campus engaging or in schools engaging, you can give students that real perspective of what these careers are like. And then that might change somebody's career decision. Had I known that the engine plant was really what it was about, maybe I would not have picked that career path, or maybe I would have.
Yeah. And I think a good example and a message to send to students too is your career isn't just what happens directly after college, that first job out of college. While I may be vice president of a university now, I mean, in the communications and marketing side, I started off mechanical engineering. So I started mechanical. I went through electrical engineering. I even went through agricultural engineering before I switched over to advertising and PR and went into that space. And for me, it was going through that really helped me understand where I needed to be. It was the internships I did in working for Lear and in mechanical engineering that taught me what is the area that I want to be in. And even more than that, I think we don't tend to remind people that industries are whole. That the tech industry has marketing jobs. The tech industry has other jobs that are in it outside of just tech too. So you can work inside of spaces and enjoy it and not also be just one level of it. I think we sometimes think it's a little bit too monolithic and not as dynamic as what we tend to be.
Great perspective. And that's something that I really spent a lot of time talking with students about over the years. I personally wasn't even empowered to think about my career in that way. I thought my career was a very linear thing, right? You study engineering and then you go from here to the next step and you go to the next step. You use the exact appropriate term, which is dynamic. And I think when young people know that, they can go into their careers more empowered. I started in engineering, but when I was a student, I was really interested in business. I just didn't know how I could do business and engineering. I didn't want to double major and spend more time on campus. Maybe I should have minored in business. Maybe I should have found a program that made a hybrid fit. I don't know. I had varied interests. But what I will say, and you used the word mentor earlier, I had a mentor that told me that an engineering degree was a great foundational degree. And many people in engineering go on to do a whole host of different things. And so I was taught, get a good foundational degree. And if you ever decide to pivot, you're always going to lean on that foundation and move into different spaces. And it's served me well so far.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that there's a lot that we have to, really teach. And, as an adjunct professor myself too, I try to tell my students all the time, a lot of it is motivation and trying to give them some strategies in order to break into the industry outside of what the books are. So what type of strategies do you give, your students or your pupils in order to break into that first job?
So look, I do this thing in class, or I used to do this thing in class where I would pull up LinkedIn and spend a class period on LinkedIn. And they would laugh, like, why are we on LinkedIn? Why are we on LinkedIn? And I would tell them, this is the most powerful app on your phone. And at the end of that conversation, if they didn't have a LinkedIn account, they were creating a LinkedIn account and getting a profile set up. I use that example because the thing that I told my students, their number one currency was relationships.
Mm-hmm.
In this day and age, because it's so competitive and the world is so open, it's not who you know, it's often who knows you. And
Mm-hmm.
using platforms like LinkedIn are a great way to create exposure for yourself. I spend my every day on LinkedIn. So we would talk a lot about who are the people you need to get in front of, or who are the folks that you need to have visibility to get where you want to get to. Go out and reach out to those folks. Do your homework. My sister calls it stalking. I call it research, but make those connections. And I had students that would take me up on it. I would tell every class, look, go on my LinkedIn. If you see somebody that you want me to connect you with, I'll make an introduction. Open-ended. And every semester, it would just be a few students that would take me up on it. And those students would either get a mentor or they'd get a job, because what they realize is we're applying in these systems that they are essentially using artificial intelligence to vet the resumes, and you're not getting to a real person. And so your relationships get you in front of a real person. So that's probably the single most important thing. And then beyond that, I would always tell my students, even today with people that I mentor, you want to be prepared for that opportunity. You manifest it, you develop the relationships, but then you also have to be prepared when that door opens to walk right into it.
So what do you think we should be telling companies? Because again, the other part to this is it is getting them to the front door, but it is also trying to make sure that the front door knows who's going to knock on it and that they understand who's coming through.
Sure.
So what do you think, if you had some companies to talk to, that the hiring managers need to understand about hiring an HBCU student? And is it different than hiring a PWI student?
Yeah, it's a great question. Another hat that I wear is that of consulting, and I've done quite a bit of diversity strategy work over the past couple of years. And companies ask me this exact question. I say, Isaac, how can we get more people like you in the door? And when they say that, I cringe a little bit, because it's like, what do you mean like me? But I get what they're saying. They're wanting dynamic people who are entrepreneurial thinkers. But I tell them that they have to be willing to cultivate that talent, and they have to be patient with developing that talent. What happens is, and I've called executives out on this, in meetings. I've said, you guys go to one HBCU, you recruit a student and it doesn't work out, and you say, oh, we tried. But if you went to Vanderbilt University and you got a student that didn't work out, you just go back and get another one. Why is that double standard exist? So I think organizations have to evolve in terms of how they view Black colleges. Our students are just as talented as any other student. The difference is often their socioeconomic background and their exposure prior to entering the university. And these are things we're solving for at the HBCU, but the companies don't know that. So they're getting the talent and they're wondering, why are certain things missing? We come from different worlds, but we're just as gifted, and in some cases even more. So you have to be patient. You have to be intentional about developing the talent, and you have to approach it from a relationship perspective. When I was at Tennessee State University, we had a great relationship with GM. They came and got all the mechanical engineering students every year. They all went to GM. Ford couldn't get them. Chrysler couldn't get them. They were going to GM. They had a great campus relationship. IBM showed up. All of a sudden, all the electrical and computer engineering students started going to IBM. And the main thing that drove that engagement was a person of color in the executive ranks who was an HBCU grad, who said, I know how we need to navigate this terrain. Give me some time. I'm going to find the talent. I'm going to cultivate the relationship. And we're going to have a lot of students from this institution coming in our door. You guys have experienced this at Howard as well. But because we got a lot of new companies showing up, right, because of all this new energy, they don't know that. And they don't have that patience, and they're not using that approach. But that would be how I would coach them on that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in that space, and I'm curious of why is it that you think that most of our stats haven't grown since 2016 in Black students getting into, these tech spaces? There's companies like Apple that will tout that there's, 9% of their workforce is Black. But we also know that a lot of that is maybe not in the particular careers and jobs that we're thinking about. It's in the warehouse. It's in these other areas that equate the Black population of a company. Why do you think it hasn't grown over the last 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, sure, Frank. I'll answer that by sharing just a brief story. My first manager at IBM, and I won't mention his name, but he was a part of my career trajectory. He told me, he said, Isaac, you don't act as though you're appreciative of this opportunity. He said this to me in a one-on-one meeting, and I was confused. I said, what do you mean? He said, you work in IBM semiconductor division. This is one of the most highly coveted jobs in tech. And you have the position, meaning you as a Black kid have this job. You should be more excited to be here. I think that perspective is how we look at tech as a whole. We look at these jobs as highly coveted, and because they're highly coveted, only certain people are deserving of these opportunities, and we'll let a few other people in, but really we're going to hold on to this and only make sure certain people have access to it. But guess what? The research shows that diverse teams perform better, that diverse companies have better financial performance and return and shareholder returns over time. Why are we still holding on to these historic mindsets? But I just think that, tech is slow to evolve in that way. And the folks that are in the leadership ranks, until more of them look like you and I, Frank, and are from backgrounds like ours, it's going to take some time to evolve.
Yeah. One of the things that, I think is important for all of us is, again, that transparency, especially for the youth coming out, because I think there's a lot of times that we aren't very transparent about where we came from, and the struggles we had and how similar we are to that student who comes from nothing a lot of times, that they can really make it. Because I know I've gotten this a lot, where there's a lot of times where, people will think that I kind of had everything handed to me.
Yep.
And I'm some exception to some rule that I don't know about, when in fact I left home when I was 17. I had to put myself through school. I had to put myself through grad school. There was I had a very bad kind of dynamic in the household. That I growing up, I didn't think that I could be anything, and I think that transparency and authenticity about those parts of your experience are also what makes the reason why HBCUs are so much stronger. Because while I may love my alma mater and I did not go to an HBCU, I wanted everything in my power to go to an HBCU, but I couldn't afford it.
Sure.
That was my problem, because I wanted to come to Howard, actually. It was the place that I wanted to be. You couldn't have told me that I'm not going to go to Howard. I visited at Howard. I stayed on campus at Howard as a senior. I knew I was coming to Howard, but I couldn't afford to go when I knew I had to put myself through school. So I had to figure out a different route. So I know there's that financial side, but HBCU plays such an important part of growing us in that space, because I had to do a lot of stuff on my own. I felt like I was out on an island for a long time, and I just happened to have some really good mentors that I ran into along the way that made sure I was in the right space. So there's a lot of that transparency that I think is important for us to, as leaders in this space, in tech, in every single area, to make sure we're going back and explaining that. I
love that.
And it's not honestly just to the people that are coming, it's actually to the white people in the room.
Yes.
And that's a conversation that I've had many times where, for instance, with George Floyd, at that particular time, I was working at a white institution. And I had so many people come up to me and say, it's horrible. What's happening is horrible. I can't believe stuff like that happens, et cetera. Luckily it doesn't happen to everyone, et cetera. And I just sat there and looked, and I said, well, I can see that you don't equate me and George Floyd as anyone close. You see us as very, very, very different people, when in fact, if I went home right now, I have cousins I have a local liquor store that I would go to. My dad used to send me to the liquor store just to play the numbers for him. We have those experiences, and any second, we as Black people, as a Black man, you can be forced into that situation. You can easily be the next name on a list. And I think that part is what I think was crippling the people around me. And so I started to be very vocal about the fact, no, I'm from Detroit. As a matter of fact, that I'm from the area that you don't think I'm from, and in fact, I had an experience that you don't think I had, because I know I've garnered respect with you, but I now need you to understand that this other student is just like me and can be better than me. So that's how we can start bridging some of these gaps in these hiring processes, because when they put you so far on a pedestal away from this other student, I think that that's where their mindsets, don't always, click in the right way for them to then make sure that they make the right decision on who they're going to hire.
Thank you so much for sharing not only that perspective, but some insights on your background. There's a chapter in my book where I talk about my experience with a colleague and how they didn't view me as Black, even though I'm the Blackest person in the room. They view me as African because of my ancestry. There's something to be said about being a Black man, because we're two Black men who are polished, who can speak in a certain mannerism and tone, and all of a sudden that shapes how people view us, but also how they view what they perceive our lived experience to be. And it couldn't be more misplaced. But there's just a huge stigma around that. I've gone into places, majority environments, have been the only Black person, and people look at me and say, oh yeah, you came from a good home. How do you know that? I never told you that. My parents split when I was 12. My parents scraped and got everything that they got because they went and got after it. Nobody gave them anything. And I struggled too. I just so happened to know how to put on a suit and show up in this meeting and do my thing. But don't let that fool you. You know what I mean? But that's just a part of the Black narrative, I think, in the duality of who we are as people. But it is, as you said, very important to share our stories. And I think not just with our white colleagues and allies, but with our young people. All of my time in the classroom that I spent showing students my successes, but then telling them about my struggles, how I've been through a divorce, how I've had failures, how I've struggled. Took me 10 years to finish my PhD. They look at me and say, wow, we never thought you struggled. Why not? I'm human. I go through things too. And you're right. I think it makes us more real, and it gives people a greater perspective, and they can appreciate us as a whole person, because we're all whole people from different walks of life. But often in the spaces you and I exist in, we get a pass. And then they feel comfortable talking about certain things around us because, we're good Black men and we speak well, and all of these myths that don't make any sense, but it's the world we live in. But we do have that responsibility to share our experiences, as you said. Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, and it goes back to a wonderful insight you said, making sure that they feel capable, which I think is just hits it right on the nose for what's important for our youth today. So let's talk about the future. Okay.
Sure.
What does the future look like for STEM programs and getting into tech for our young Black boys and girls?
Yep. I think that we all now know that STEM is the future. I think that the pandemic made that visible, right? If we weren't aware of that before the pandemic, we are now, because everybody had to shift and pivot to some type of virtual format in church, in school, in work, whatever you may have been doing, shifted to virtual. So now that we know that tech is a part of our future and it's not going anywhere, I foresee a future where more of our communities are engaged in tech. At Pivot, we set up a nonprofit called Project Pivot, and we're only working in K-12, giving young kids exposure to robotics and other things. And I'm seeing so much more pop up. I want to see companies get on that train too. And so that's something else that I foresee happen. I foresee more companies saying we need to engage in early exposure in doing things like Apple with some of these hours of code programs and other things like that to get our young people involved. This idea of challenging the status quo around tech diversity is going to take a collective effort. Companies, governments, our community as well, organizations, we all have to get our hands in and get involved. Our community is not going to meet our full potential unless we embrace a future where tech is a part of who we are.
Yeah. I think that is such insightful comments there. So the last question, I want to make sure our listeners take away some really tangible things. And I love to speak to our K through 12 because those are our future HBCU students as well as our HBCU ones. So from your perspective, Pivot is an amazing place. We all don't have access to it. If I'm in an area of the country where I don't have access to something like a Pivot and I'm K through 12, what are some of the key things that I can be doing, 3 things that I can be doing to make sure that I'm preparing myself to get into that tech program at a HBCU? And as an HBCU student, what are the things that I need to be doing? 3 items that can prepare me for walking in the door and getting that first tech job.
Really quick, I'll make this quick because I do this with my kids a lot. If you're in the K-12 space, no matter where you are, your mindset should be on creation instead of consumption. How can you create? Once you start thinking about a creative mindset, think about what you're passionate about, and then find pathways for you to express that passion in a creative way. One of my sons is into gaming. Okay, you're going to make apps. Another son is into aviation. Okay, you're going to learn how to fly a plane. And that's what we're doing. For my college students that are in the HBCU landscape and you're looking for your first career in tech, my number one thing I always tell students is you should get an internship before you graduate. Don't walk off of that campus without having had an internship, because that's the bar now. Companies are coming to the table and they're saying, well, this student is great, but they don't have any work experience. So let's kill that noise by going to get an internship, getting that experience on your resume. That also gives you some perspective on, is this what I really want to do? Or maybe I want to do something else. Build relationships. When you go work at these companies, go knock on doors, go meet as many people as you can. They love to hear from you. Find you a mentor. So when you get back to college, you got that experience, but you've also got that mentor. And then the third thing, be prepared. Know where you're going, understand why and what you're trying to accomplish in your life, but be prepared for what comes next.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think those are awesome tips. And I want to add one more on to that, especially for the HBCUs out there. There are a lot of HBCUs that are building these connection points with companies. Howard is one of them, of course. We have a program called Howard West, which is something that our president, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, started back in 2017, which is an initiative, educational and career development initiative between Google and Howard University, and where we actually send students out to Google to spend a semester taking class there, learning from their developers, learning in that space, so we can get people into that organization as well. Because again, there's AI that's coming. We didn't even get an opportunity to talk about that, but as AI happens, we have to be a part of the discussion. We can't be on the outside, because the technology is going to move forward, and it needs to move forward with the input, the direction, and the guidance of the Black community. And as we will continue fighting that fight to make sure those doors are open, we are going to encourage every one of our tech students to make sure you're utilizing the resources you have. There is a Dr. Adai at your university somewhere. There's a Frank Tramble at yours, that we're all willing to be here to support you along the way to get you into that first job. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Adai, for spending this time with me. Thank you, AfroTech World and the Metaverse. We want to thank you. And of course, we look forward to seeing you getting your first job in tech. Hopefully this conversation helped out.
And let me just say one last thing, Frank. Kudos to you and you all's team at Howard. I first read about that Howard West program a few years ago. I was blown away. You guys are blazing the trail in this HBCU landscape, and you're showing all of us what's possible and what can be done. So kudos to you and your team.
Thank you so much. And again, we appreciate everybody participating in this fireside chat.